So why this is going to be, for me, an important talk is you hear all the time companies saying, we like people with experience. But there's that problem that people have where the experience they have is just repeating the same thing over and over again. So I'm a big believer in getting a little bit of theory so that when the events are happening in front of you, you have a context to get that experience. Right? And that's why I like giving talks like this. So how it's going to go is I'll introduce myself. I'll then get a little bit of a sense of who's in the room here. We'll go through a presentation, and while we're going through, I've put some post-it notes and pens out. If you need more, I've got some at the front here. And as we go through, if you spot waste in your world, make a note of it, okay? So that at the end, we'll do a quick exercise where we can actually compare the wastes that you've identified with Agile practices. And I'll put a couple of slides up so that we can do that. And then we can actually compare and contrast, okay? And something I want you to bear in mind, I probably won't be much use if you think that you're going to ask me lots of questions about how to solve wastes in your world. Because in this, you guys are the experts, okay? And so for you to get the most out of it, to get some takeaways, do make sure that you actually write things down as you go along, and do hang on to your stickies afterwards. If you want to put them in a notebook, that's good too. So, my name is Andrew Webster. I've been an Agilist since about 2004. I got my Scrum Master in 2009, and I'm just finishing up the paperwork to get my Certified Scrum Professional. I've been working in IT since about 1997. I've worked as a developer mostly as a database developer. I used to live in the UK, then I moved to Australia, then I moved to Alabama, and now I live here in San Jose. So I like to say I've lived in 3 countries and Alabama. While I was in Australia, I certified as a Microsoft Certified Solution Developer. I was living in Brisbane, which is on the East Coast. And there's an enormous Microsoft community there. Because, I don't know if you know, but a lot of the .NET framework wasn't written in Redmond, it was actually written at Griffith University, which is just south of Brisbane. And that meant that Microsoft had a very big MSDN user group there. And in 2004, they sent across a guy called Dr. Neil Rudin, who was one of their Agile evangelists, Microsoft, who knew? And he gave this fantastic talk. There were about, 200, 250 people in the room, all of the sort of East Coast heavy hitters. And he started off saying, okay, hands up, who's got a bug tracking database in their workplace? And we're all like, yeah, sure. And it's like, why? Why do you keep in your bugs? We were like, you told me to, sorry. And then he laid out extreme programming. And it was a road to Damascus moment for almost everybody there. He knew what he was talking about. He was on his 10th startup. One of them had been a team of 10 people that wrote the software for the NASDAQ in 3 months and released it with 3 logic bugs. So he knew his stuff. And Australians, being very pragmatic people who are quite naturally have a culture of supporting each other, they looked at this and went, yeah, we'll do that. It was extraordinary. There was no resistance to agility. It was like the east coast of Australia went Agile overnight. One of my clients back then, Suncorp Metway, by 2006, I think it was, had put 6,000 people through their Agile Academy. Very cool indeed. So I've been married since 2009. That's how come I'm here. Late 2005, I left a comment on a blog. Somebody told me I was full of crap. Now we're married. And I would say this is going up all the time. I've worked on roughly 60 projects in my career. About 40 of them Agile, about 20 of them not. And the majority of those Agile ones were in Australia. And I just got used to doing projects that succeeded. The last one I was on was a project working for Queensland Transport Bus and Ferry Ticketing System, rebuilding the system. And we finished it $9 over budget. And that was because I parked in the wrong parking deck on the last day. It was my fault. But we got used to that. We got used to steering towards whatever the limiting criteria was. So I'm completely sold out to agility. Now I work for Solutions IQ, actually embedded here at PayPal. I'm one of the embedded coaches here. If you're interested, are we making the decks available to people afterwards? We are, good. I have a blog, and you can go and read my words of wisdom there. That's my email address. Now, let's get into it. This is the problem. Organisations all over the place, you keep seeing this. They're pushing as hard on the brake as they are on the gas. And yet they've still got the horsepower to keep moving ahead, right? And I don't know, I can't prove this, but I would assert that we might have avoided the financial crash if these businesses weren't doing this. If they were freeing up all of the energy that they're putting into keeping their foot on the brake, it could have been a completely different story. Now, let's just go back to our roots as Agilists. Let's just remind ourselves by having a quick look at the Agile Manifesto. And this is a good point for me to check to see who's in the room. I've been around in agility for, say, a decade. So hands up, anybody that's been around agility for 10 years or longer. Okay. 5 years or longer? 2 years? 1 year? Today? Awesome! Good, excellent, love it. Good, some new faces in the room, I love it. So this may be new to you, but you'll get familiar with it over time. The word I really want us to focus on here is value. The Agile Manifesto talks about valuing this side over this side, which is not to say that this side doesn't have value, but this has more. And I think this is a really good way of thinking, that it's not about saying this is right and this is wrong. Something we value more than something else. Delivering value over cost and schedule. Customer needs over balancing numbers. Pushing forward over pulling back. Earning over saving. This is good for your own personal finances. And effectiveness over efficiency. I was reminded just the other day that some of the coaches were having lunch, and one of them was reminding us of the story from a British TV show called Yes, Prime Minister. And the Minister for Health was being very proud of his work and showing the Prime Minister around. And they were looking at a hospital that was now the paragon of efficiency. And as they were walking around, the Prime Minister was like, so don't hospitals usually have machines? And the Health Minister was like, no, way too expensive, we got rid of the machines. And I'm not seeing very many doctors. Well, they're incredibly expensive, we got rid of the doctors. And how about the patients? Oh, well, they were the most expensive of all. And so we've got rid of them as well. And so here is your paragon of efficiency. Not a very effective hospital, I will grant you. So let's take this a little further. If you pull back, if you're trying to save money, if you're trying to cut costs, you can pull back on that, but you're never going to get below zero. You're going to approach it, but you're never going to actually get better than nothing. Do you see what I mean? Whereas if you can actually find a way to release some energy to allow you to push forward, there's no upper limit. And the chances are that the energy to do that will come from doing maybe a little bit of this. But that's what we're after. This is cost-based accounting. This is throughput accounting, right? So bear this image in mind. Some of you are visual, so you'll have some pictures. Some of you are auditory, so you can listen to me. And there's a couple of auditory kinesthetics who are already doing doodles in the room, so feel free to use the post-it notes for that. But bear this image in mind. What would happen if you let this puppy off the leash? So, let's do a little bit of background. There's a fellow called Taichi Ono. He is the father of the TPS. And for those of you, I was actually wearing a t-shirt for this yesterday. Anybody seen Office Space, the movie? Yeah, and I hope you're using the right template for the TPS report. Yeah, that's good. I don't mean that. What we're talking about is the Toyota production system. Now, fundamentals. Manufacturing cars is expensive, right? So cars are expensive. Surprise. Well, you may remember, if you know history, that the 1940s was not a very good time for Japan. Things hadn't worked out very well for them, and as a country, Japan was pretty much broke. So this was Toyota's problem. How can you reduce the price of cars so that you can sell them into a broke market? Well, could you mass produce? Well, no, that's not going to help because it's a broke market and it's a small market. You can't sell more of them. There's not enough people to sell them to. So this is what Taichi Ono did. And you'll hear this quote all the time around lean thinking. All we're doing is looking at the timeline from the moment a customer gives us an order to the point when we collect the cash. And we're reducing that timeline by removing the non-value added wastes. Removing the non-value added wastes. Well, what exactly is waste? There's a simple definition. It's the opposite of value, right? That's all. Well, that kind of begs the question, what's value? Well, I think the simplest answer is the one that I use to remind people that I'm coaching where the money comes from. People don't get paid for showing up. People don't get paid for writing code. They get paid because at some point a customer cares enough about what you've produced to give you money for it, right? Now, there are other values, but we're in business. That's the primary source of value, is a customer going, yeah, that rocks, I'll have that. In fact, we can expand that to quality. I would assert that quality is actually a customer liking something enough to remain your customer and keep buying things. Now, if you Google quality, it's got a really nice little definition. The standard of something is measured against other things of a similar kind, the degree of excellence of something. So in other words, value and quality are how a customer remains loyal. So this also maps into lean startup thinking about how you convert and retain customers, right? And you'll see a synonym is value. So they're very closely related thoughts, okay? Now, is all waste bad? No, not all waste is bad. Let's have a look. Failure. A lot of people are really scared of failure, and sometimes that's a personal development thing, but sometimes it's seen as being wasteful. But the fact of the matter is that people, on average, learn fastest when they're failing about 50% of the time. That's a really easy way to think about failure. That failure is game over. And sure enough, there are in some areas of work, like, I don't know, building a space shuttle, failure is really not an option. What successful people know is that you fail all the way to success. So even if you look at space shuttles, well, maybe not the shuttle, but if you look at the Apollo missions, I would argue that NASA is one of the most agile organizations there is. You wouldn't know it when you look in their engineering departments, but when you look at the iterative and incremental approach of building out the Apollo missions, and that they did not get stopped by people dying in Apollo 1, that's a great example of failing forward. Humans learn quickest, like I say, about 50% of the time. Here's a cool one. Anybody like playing computer games? I do. I love them. Absolutely. How much failure do you experience when you're gaming? Right? A lot. And that's how you learn. And that's actually the joy of the game, is learning and beating the thing. Let's have a look at some other examples of waste. Risk reduction. You could argue that risk reduction is not a value-added approach. But it's dealing with potential value loss, right? And this is just a slide that's an excuse for me to use this picture. I love this picture, right? But it would have been good if somebody had done a bit more risk reduction around this, yeah? Do you think value was added when that happened? No. Train wreck. So let's get back to the Toyota production system. What Taichi Ono and his colleagues identified were three major areas of waste. Muda, Muri, and Mura. Muda it's essentially waste of activity, waste of things that we do, and there are two types of it. We've already touched on this. Type 1, non-value added tasks that are essential. So I've worked quite a lot in finance, and I've never had a customer come up to me and thank me warmly for all of the work I did to make sure that we're compliant with Sarbanes-Oxley. Right? They've never thanked me for it, but you have to do it, right? Then there's type 2, non-value added tasks that aren't essential, and we'll be coming back to those in some detail. Then there's Muri, which is overburden, and Mura, which is unevenness. Frankly, all of these deserve at least an hour each. In fact, they deserve books each. They're huge subjects, but today we're just going to focus on these. The type 2, non-value added tasks that aren't essential. Because to be honest, those are probably the ones that are closest to being in your control. Now, let's see where they came from. A fantastic couple called Tom and Mary Poppendick have written like the definitive books that mapped lean from the manufacturing world over into the software world. And so what they did was take the 7 wastes of manufacturing and translate them into software development. So we now have partially done work that was considered to be inventory, extra features mapped to overproduction, relearning to extra processing, handoffs to transportation, delays, waiting, setting, task switching to motion, and finally defects, dear old defects. And we'll deal now with each of these 7 ones. So, let's go to the first one. Partially done work. So, let's take a look. Look at these 2 pictures. So, a little bit of a thing. In housing, where does the value reside? I'd say it's in occupancy, it's in people living in them. So which of these 2 rows of houses actually has higher value right now? Top one. Right. So where's the waste? Partially done work to us means work in progress. And it's not that, work shouldn't be in progress. It's large amounts of work in progress, right? And it's a problem because your customer ain't going to give you any money for it while it's in progress. Every now and then, yes, you do get a lovely contract where they give you some money up front, but that's not what we're talking about. High amounts of partially done work are the problem. So, for example, uncoded documentation, right? The big upfront design. By the time you finish building the whole pesky thing, it's probably out of date, right? Unsynchronized code. Ever had a developer go away on holiday and forget to check something in? Untested code. Well, if it's untested, you have no idea whether there are bugs in there or not. And until you can actually repeatedly prove that it works, how do you know it's got any value? I'm actually going to do a lightning talk this afternoon, which is all about value residing in tested valuable features. Undocumented code. Well, if you're good at this and you're operating at a reasonable pace, you can probably write really good self-documenting code. But it's also reasonable to produce documentation that covers the areas that are not self-evident from your beautifully written code, right? But that then needs to be kept up to date in parallel. And you may see in a lot of these that there are things where you go, yeah, but we kind of got to do that. Good, but at least now you're starting to see that this is a waste to manage, okay? So, like I say, if you see anything here that sounds familiar from your world, make a note, because we'll be spending probably 15-20 minutes at the end going through an exercise with them. Okay? Lastly, this is a really big one, undeployed code. This is a bit trickier than it looks, because right enough, there are companies out there who deploy 50 times a day. There are companies out there that deploy more than that. There are other companies that deploy, once a quarter. And you can look at both of them and go, well, where is the waste? Some companies that deploy 50 times a day get in trouble with their customers because their customers are just like, God, will you stop changing it? But if they're deploying using a good testing model, an A/B testing model, and they've determined that that deployment is valuable, or they're deploying to do that testing, it's a great way of minimizing waste, right? But if you're saving up all of your code for a great big bang, you need to keep your customers ready, otherwise you're going to overwhelm them, right? So that was partially done work. Extra features. You'd think that if you were to take the best components and compile them into the best artifact, you'd get the best artifact. Doesn't always work, right? Anybody see the classic Simpsons episode? I've actually, since I put this up, found evidence that there are engineers out there who have built this car, that there are real versions of this. I would love to see that. It's awesome. So, let's look at some examples from our worlds. The stakeholder's pet. Oh, this is a nasty one. Have you ever been told, just do it because the boss's wife thinks it's lovely? Right? There has been no ascertaining that it will have value to people who give us money for it. long feedback cycle. If you're building a whole bunch of extra features, it takes longer to get out there to determine if they really are actually valuable, to find out whether you should have built them in the first place. Gold plating. Okay, I've got some cool ones here. Who have you, developers? Hands up, developers? Engineers? Yeah, ever been guilty of this? Resume-driven development? No, not hardly at all, no. Right. Then there's developer-driven development, just knows it's useful. Yeah. Yeah, I can remember carefully hand-building a tool that would parse addresses back into sentence case really early on in my career, before I realised that there was actually just one line of code that would do that anyhow. You know. I knew it was going to be useful. Then we have sounded good to everyone. And that's sort of development by conspiracy. I'm sure we've all seen that, where it's something that sounded great, it went into the spec, again, nobody checked, is this going to be of any real value to customers? And here's the real toxin in this. If you're building too much, all of that too much will contain all of the other wastes. It's exponential. And I know you can't read that down the bottom, but you get it. It's exponential, right? It's really, really toxic. What's next? Relearning. Well, learning's good, right? We like learning. Anybody ever inherited a project? And as part of the inheritance, they say, no, it's all in the documentation. Just read the documentation, you'll be fine. Yeah. Yeah. I used to make a very good living out of rebuilding software because that was the documentation and nobody could possibly understand it, so we started again. So, like I say, learning's good, right? Now, relearning means that, well, there's something's gone wrong. Maybe the original learning just didn't take, right? You got taught and you forgot. Someone else has to learn. Hand off. Oh, dear God. I meant to change your font later on because hand off is so evil it gets its own font. Right? Now, delay, which we'll look at in a bit more detail. Delay fuels relearning. Anybody ever gone home on a Friday going, yeah, I'll know what I was doing, and I'll just pick this up on a Monday, and by Monday you've forgotten? You know, make sure the team that did it originally maintain it, because they'll remember what they did. No, they won't. I wish they did, but they don't. And of course that delay then creates this difficult feedback loop. You know, while there's a delay, you're not getting feedback to find out if it's valuable, so you're creating waste. Let's look at some more examples. Not writing down a good idea. Gosh, that was good in the keynote this morning. Write down what it was that you decided to do, so that after doing it, you can go back and go, was it the right thing to do? Right? If it was, keep that. That's really good, right? But how often have you come out of a meeting going, yeah, awesome meeting, guys, great. And you come back to the next meeting going, what did we decide last time? Happens all the time. Not using existing knowledge. Oh my, this is, again, for developers, this is so toxic. I used to love solving problems as a developer, so I go and try and solve it. And finally, I found the answer to that, this amazing thing. I don't know whether you've heard of it. It's called Google, right? And I'm shameless. I'm very happy to Google for code and copy other people's code. Why cross the minefield when there's footsteps in front of you, right? Put your feet in other people's footsteps. Poorly written code, over-documented, under-documented code. We've kind of covered that already. And then task switching. Ooh, okay, we're going to get a whole section on task switching. But every time you switch tasks, you're going to forget a little bit of what you were doing last time, and you've got to relearn it, right? We'll come back to that. That should have got its own font as well. That's a really nasty one. Okay, what are we doing for time? When are we running to? Is it
12:30.
12:30. Good. We're on track. That's perfect. So handoffs. This is where they should have got the nasty font. There we go. So, have you ever been in this situation? And you're that guy? Right? Something's just turned up and you go, Now, do you remember I mentioned Tom and Mary Poppendick? Yeah. Well, they've done a lot of research on this, and this is kind of parroting what they would say about it. Handoff is by necessity narrow-band communication, right? Documents and diagrams, they lack tacit knowledge. If you want to Google tacit knowledge, you'll find out it's knowledge, right, that is missing from documents and diagrams. It's a fully circular thing. But, I mean, there's other research that's been done, lots of research that's been done into communication. So, for example, right now, around about 12, oh, no, less than that, about 7% of what you're understanding comes from the words that I'm giving you. Around about 13, 14, 15% is coming from the tone of voice, right? So if I talk like that all the way through, you'd probably get a heck of a sight less than being a bit more animated about it. The rest of it is coming from body language, right? So why ever have phone meetings? Well, if they're in Chennai and you're in San Jose, you've got to have a phone meeting, right? But remember that you're losing something. So make sure that you don't step over that. It's really important in phone meetings to repeat back to people what you heard from them to make sure that you're in accord, yeah? They went so far as to suggest that every time there's a handoff, here, read this, it's got everything you need, you're going to lose around about 50% of the information that you're handing off. So what happens when you do that twice? 3 times? 4 times? How about that? I'm not sure if this is actually strictly true, but you get the point. That if you hand something off 5 times, by the time the poor schmuck at the end gets it, he could be down to 3% of what you intended them to know about, right? Why would you ever do waterfall? Waterfall consists of handoffs. Cross-team integration. Oops. Well, sometimes we have to because the architecture is so difficult, complicated and specialized. You have to have teams aligned with the architecture. So make sure you've got something in place to manage that. That's a great opportunity for waste. Dev and QA, oh dearie me. It's something I'm very happy when I see organizations go, no, we've just got engineers, they test their own stuff. And QA may actually do something to validate the assumptions made about what customers told us, but they're not in there doing the testing, right? That's very good. Okay, don't forget to write down anything that you've noticed from your work. Delays. Oh, this is a fun one, this. Okay, delay, you think it's pretty obvious, right? Delay, if you've got to wait for something, there's a waste there, right? So I've stolen a lot of this shamelessly from Jeff Patton. You may have seen some of this already. So here's an artist, and he's thinking, I'm going to do a picture of a woman in a pastoral setting. It's going to look like this. So let's get started. I'll do this bit of it, and I'll do this bit of it, and we're finished, right? When could he deliver? 1, 2, or 3?
3.
Right. So when does the value show up? Right. Incrementing. Incrementing calls for a fully formed idea that you build a bit at a time. All right? Now, here's the same guy. He's had a bit of a mindset shift, right? He's thinking, I don't know, woman in a pastoral setting, what could that look like? Let's do a sketch. Yeah, that's all right. Looks good. Yeah? Fill it in a bit. It's getting there. Yay! Well, at what point do you think a customer might go, that's awesome, I want it like that? It could be any of them, couldn't it? Iterating allows you to move from a vague idea to realization. It's an important distinction to make. You start with the rough version, validate it, then build in quality at each pass, right? Remember what we were saying about value and quality? The customer might like this one, but they're going to keep this one forever, right? Now, it's a little low, but if you can see this, this is great. You might want to have this tattooed onto your forehead. It's not an iteration if you only do it once. Iterate work to increment value. A beautifully groomed backlog will see the same story in different forms going through it. Oh yeah, just because I found these yesterday, I'm going to show them. The thing that appalled me was that I found these on a blog, the guy saying these are all Agile examples. Whoa. I'm afraid they're not. And all of us have built software that would map onto any of these. So that was the bonus slide I put in, Ravi. That's why, yeah, I love it. That's just brilliant. Anyhow, moving on. All right, so when it comes down to it, there are really two kinds of delays. This isn't rocket science, right? There's delaying the start of something, right, which is, problem with big upfront design. And then making it take longer, delaying the end of it, right? How many of you guys are development managers? Okay, because with exception, I have seen a pattern in the past of dev managers being the people that turn up and go, yeah, I know about the backlog and everything, but can you just do this now? Right? Sorry, it's nothing personal. Right? And that's what happens there. All right? It also sometimes happens when people from C-level walk in and say, no, I want you to do this now. And no, I'm not going to help you take out anything else, just do it. Okay? Long exhaustive requirements phase. Are these starting to get familiar to you now? Yep. Building all the features. Well, we just saw what happened with that, right? Ever got stuck where you're waiting for somebody to sign something off and they are the single person that can do that sign off and they're off in the Bahamas for 3 weeks? Yeah, this is exactly what I was saying. Increasing the working process. And by the way, I'm using the word process carefully here. Work in progress kind of implies that some progress being made. Well, that's like 90% done. Just got the last 90% to do. It's either done or it's not done. It's work in process. When it's finished, it's finished. And the analogy I like, this is good for anybody that lives around here. They'd get this one. What's the value on a freeway? It's getting somewhere, isn't it? It's actually being able to get somewhere. So on-ramps in rush hours have traffic lights to sub-optimize the part to optimize the whole. If you don't have traffic lights on the on-ramps, what happens? You get a very efficient freeway. It's chock full of cars, but the value's not showing up, so it's not very effective, right? Again, gaps between dev and QA. Dev done. Dev done. QA done. Waiting for somebody to deploy it out into the world. And again, cross-team dependencies. We've finished, but we're waiting for them. Or we haven't finished and they're waiting for us. Okay. Task switching. Anybody here have an opinion about multitasking? Anybody think it's a good idea? Let's just have a little look at that. Oh, well, multitaskers, we do lots of stuff. Now, it shows up in all kinds of ways. It shows up as people trying to do too many things at once. It also shows up as teams going, well, Bill's doing this, and Mary's doing that, and Jeff's doing the other, and Sanjeeva's doing that. Right? Is any of it going to get finished?
But
so,
even then, most of the job requirements have ability to juggle multiple.
Right. Saints preserve us. Yes, I know. So let's have a look at this. This is the good example. We have 3 tasks to do. Task A, Task B, and Task C. Where do you think value is going to show up? Well, for Task A it's there, for Task B there, and Task C it's there, right? Now, we've got a multitasking team, right? We're going to do a bit of everything. Where do you think the value is going to show up here? Oops. So not only did it take longer, nothing showed up until the end. Because you see all these little tiny gaps? Do you remember what we were saying about relearning? Jackie Chan! No, unacceptable! I had to get Jackie Chan in there somewhere. It's too good not to. It is far and away the deadliest waste. If you have any way you can create any influence in your world to stop people from multitasking or to stop it yourself, please do. It is far and away the deadliest waste. Let's have a look at what's going on with that. Everybody experienced being in flow. When you're really working on something, you're deep in it, you've got your mojo on, and somebody comes up and goes, did you get the email I sent you? Typically, it can take about 15 minutes to come back from that state of deep thinking, right? Thereabouts. So if you have 4 of those in a day, where you're really trying to work on something, you may have lost an hour. Anybody ever got home going, I ran around like a crazy person today and I got nothing done? Right. Stop it. Once again, it causes delay. It delays value. It's worse when you're adding into existing work in process. You're in your flow, somebody comes up and says, can you just knock this out for me today? It's, it's really important. It's the CEO's wife. Sorry. And that's the fix. Start finishing, stop starting. Right?
So
Remember
there is a manga style cartoon book just titled that.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Remember those 4 guys each working on one thing? Get all 4 of them working on the first thing. Finish it. Second thing, finish it. Third thing, finish it. One team might get 10 things 90% done. But there's no value in 90% done. It's not finished. The same team, if they swarmed on each item and got things done one at a time to completion, they may not get 9 out of 10 things done. They might get 7 or 8. But there are 7 or 8 chunks of value that are available at the end of getting it done. Right?
So, Andrew, one of the arguments you hear from a lot of developers is that if it's the same small piece of code that you're working on, having multiple people, if 3 or 4 people working at the same time, sometimes is actually counterproductive.
Yes, it can be, sometimes. But it's good to be alert to it, because sometimes it's not. And teams that have actually learnt to pair or to swarm can be dramatically more productive, not necessarily in producing more work, but in producing better work. One of the first books I ever read about software development was Steve McConnell's Code Complete, which was written, gosh, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago?
90s.
Yeah, back then, it was recognized that about 10% of the cost of software came in its creation, and 90 was the long tail of support, which is kind of taking care of bugs. That's the point he was making. That's barely shifted in the intervening decade and a half. Oops.
So just to add to you, I totally agree. When you're saying that, I was just thinking the same thing, but one thing we did very recently in my team, the dev manager just sat down with the team and said, the problem is you're not checking your code into Git. So you're just keeping it in your dev environment. So we started making infrastructural changes. We've started, decoupling the environments.
Write it down. We'll come back to that as an example afterwards. Brilliant, thank you. Good. Defects. This one won't take too long. Yeah. I'd like to think it's just possible that the owner of this arm is profoundly committed to postmodern irony. Right? I somehow suspect not. Don't you think he'd have loved to have avoided that defect? And that's all you need to know about defects. That's it in its entirety. Waste equals the impact of the defect times the time the defect lies undetected. Anybody using test-driven development at work? Good. Yeah? So, we're getting there. What's possible? Well, let the puppy off the leash, all right? Take your foot off the brake. So, how are we doing? Perfect, bang on time, excellent. So what I want to do is, we've already formed small groups at the tables, that's perfect, we don't need to worry about that. So what I'd like you to do is to, talk with each other about what you found, cluster the wastes if you're starting to notice patterns. Now, I'm going to put up a couple of slides that will cycle around. They'll show you the 7 wastes, and they'll show you a wonderful graphic. It's a little hard to read, but it's there. From the Agile Alliance's website. It's like their tube map of all of the Agile practices. It's a brilliant reference. And start to cross-refer one to the other. What wastes could you deal with which practices? Which practices do you now go, oh, I get it, that's why that works. It's because it's dealing with this quick. And it's going to look something like this, and I'm only showing you this because I've proud animated it like this. There you go, cool. So, this is now over to you guys. We'll give it, say, 10 minutes. And then for the last 10 minutes, I want to hear from the tables. And if somebody has something, I'd like to hear from anybody else that's got something similar. Okay? And then we'll be done in time for lunch. So you've got 10 minutes. Okay? And I'm going to show you the cheat sheet.
Whatever we could do, I did
Okay, guys,
More challenging.
let's wrap up. Hands up if you're done.
Your first language, you know what I mean? Like it's extra
Well,
stuff.
do we have a choice?
Please put your hand up if you're done.
Let's be transparent.
Yeah, there you go. I'm so sorry, I didn't get this going earlier and I didn't notice that I hadn't got it going. But that was the tube map. It's a wonderful reference from the Agile Alliance. There's a link in tiny little blue at the bottom there. So when you get the deck, you can have a look. Or just look on the Agile Alliance website. It's a great reference. And on their website, it's fully interactive. You can click on it and drill through. So let's hear from people. What wastes did you discover? And how would you manage the wastes?
Figured out the waste, we didn't know how to manage it.
Okay, well, what was the waste?
The waste was basically not getting done. So partial work done, basically.
Right. So did you guys hear that? The waste was not getting work done. So from the world of sort of agility and agile practices, what would you suggest as a way to get work done?
I mean, you're telling the definition of done, right? I mean, that's a way to kind of say as a practice.
Yep. I'd suggest also a definition of ready, because that would ensure that a team is in a position to go, good, this story is in a condition where we think we could actually get it done. Right? Definition of ready is great for a team to go, product owner, you've got it into good shape. Definition of done is for the product owner to say to the team, great, you finished it, it's in good shape. So maybe those two. So I did have an answer for that one. There you go. Any others? You were talking to me before about one great one.
Oh, I'm going to call it the eighth waste, but it's around managing talent or how organizations actually manage talent.
Yeah.
So we have a bunch of examples, right? Like people being asked to solve problems even though they're not the most intimate in it. Like managers solving problems and they're not doing the work.
Right.
Traditional silo and functional organizations versus a focus on the value stream and the flow.
Right.
Managers managing instead of leading people, and then organizational misalignment hindering the progress.
I'd agree. And that's actually, in a way, that's diagnosing the disease that causes these symptoms. And it's really interesting. This is not the first time I've given this talk. And each time I do, what comes up are the soft problems, the team or organizational level problems. And that's kind of out of scope for this. But for example, when's the team performance model session today? Have we missed that?
Oh, it's right now.
It's right now. So, there you go. Recently, the coaches at Solutions IQ got training in a thing called the team performance model. It's an extension of the forming, storming, norming, and performing model of teams. It's fabulous. Google it, team performance model from Grove Consulting. It's not free. This is a company that makes money by training people and selling training materials. It's the best model I have ever seen, and I'm not shilling for them, I don't get any money from them for telling you this, for solving team level problems. And even at a high level, managers can take their team performance indicator test to get an indicator of what's going on in the team, that it's not high performing. And there's all kinds of things. I was just in Michael Spade's talk about agile coaching, and he was touching on a lot of the organizational stuff. We heard it in the keynote this morning. So it's kind of out of scope for this, but it is a huge area, and it's not a surprise there's lots of people that give talks about that. Anything else? Any other wastes showing up? If you think back to the set of 7 wastes, like we've done partially done work. Anybody notice anything around extra features? Yeah, so say more about extra features.
So one of the things that I find in our team is the concept of iteration. I don't think all our leaders are bought into the fact that there's going to be incremental value.
Mm-hmm.
Let us demo it, iteratively. So there's this, but where's the big picture? So you have to keep building these extra features, mostly the outer scope, but I don't know how it happens that you're an agile organization, but still you're required to give a date. You're still required to say on what date you're going to deliver the entire picture, right? So
Yes.
then nobody wants to see it too. And
Yes.
I find it really hard to kind of instill the idea that there's going to be incremental value.
Yes.
Come to our demos, watch it.
Yes, it is a problem, because otherwise you're still in the grip of the iron triangle.
Yeah.
That in agility, you tend to go, no, we do fix the date, end of the sprint or the release or whatever, but we've also fixed the team. So that means we've got to vary the scope. That's how we do it.
But sometimes there's also like this developer-driven mentality where they're like, no, but I think this is also good. We say, no, wait,
No,
time
it's
out.
not.
It's not a part of the feature. We can build that later, so.
I don't have time to do it now, but I'm hoping this afternoon in the lightning talks, I will address that in a 3 to 10 minute talk. Right? We've got 5 minutes now, so I'm not going to use up that time. But I kind of hint at that. Okay? And you're absolutely right. This is why we want to do thin vertical slices rather than build huge chunks of everything. You're right. Yeah. Anybody else got anything around that? Okay. How about, what's another good one? Oh, say handoffs. Anybody got any? Yeah.
One of the big concerns, I've worked a number of times recently with development teams that were overseas, and so the handoff there was, you talked about multiple kinds of the problem of not having body language, of time differences, of language differences potentially, and then only having certain times a week where it was very challenging to have
Right.
you couldn't necessarily do meetings daily.
Did you find any solutions for it or anything that improved it?
I mean, one of the things we did is just made sure that every day that we did, even when we did or didn't have a stand-up, we were all on the phone together, there was a document every day that said, this is what we worked on, these are the questions that we had,
Right.
these are the answers, and everybody was kind of responsible for responding to everything at the next time. So when I came into work every morning, there was a list.
Right.
And
So
when I left every evening, I sent them a list.
got it. You got to grips with rather than going too hard. You went, how can we?
Yeah.
Which is great. So exactly, there's waste in there, and you live with it by managing it, and it's identified. That's great. It's also a good reason for, if you can fly the team or a representative of the team over for a few weeks, so you actually get a face.
Yeah.
Can you use video meetings? Can you use Google Hangouts or Skype?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things that you can use to do that. So how are we doing for time? One last one. Anybody got another one? If not on handoffs, how about task switching or defects? I'm just seeing a lot of nodding. Yes.
Done a lot of work with very early stage startups.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I noticed between that and enterprise projects tend to hire some younger folks. You have a big difference sometimes on teams between skill level. So they sometimes can't handle tasks super good. And you end up with a bottleneck
Yes.
on a team where the senior person might have to even mentor people.
Yes.
And because they, for whatever reason, and you end up with bottlenecks there.
Absolutely. There's a good point that, what's his name?
And you don't have that problem on startups because generally they don't hire,
No, that's,
there's no rookies usually.
no, right,
It's an
absolutely.
early stage MVP that you're building, you have some founders and some extra developers,
Right.
that's it.
Well, it's the Shuhari thing, isn't it, that you've actually got to take people through that.
And it's not even agile really at that.
No. And in fact, I've heard numerous authorities, and I'd add my voice to support them, say that agility actually doesn't work until you reach a certain level of maturity. Maturity as a developer, I don't mean as, big grown up. But you've got to get to a certain point where you're not having to worry about being down in the weeds the whole time before it actually makes sense and it can work. So, absolutely. Guys, I think we're there. I think we're at time. So if you've got any last questions, come and ask me afterwards. I'll be around. I'm going to be here for the whole day. And enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much. Don't forget to do the restaurant.